Lisa Martinez sat at her control station aboard the orbital research facility New Horizon, her fingers dancing across the communication arrays as she monitored the vast emptiness of space. The third shift was always quiet, with most of the crew asleep and only essential systems running at full capacity. She had been doing this job for 3 years now, listening to the cosmic background radiation and the occasional chatter from Earth-based stations. But tonight something was different. A faint signal emerged from the static, barely detectable above the normal space noise. Lisa frowned and adjusted her equipment, trying to isolate the transmission. The signal was unlike anything in their databases, with frequency patterns that seemed almost organic in nature. She called Dr. Kevin Roberts, the station's chief language expert, knowing that his curiosity about unknown signals would override any complaints about being woken up at this hour. Kevin arrived within minutes, his hair disheveled and his lab coat hastily thrown over his sleeping clothes. He took one look at the signal patterns on Lisa's screen and his eyes widened with excitement. This was definitely not human in origin, and the mathematical structures embedded within the transmission suggested an intelligence trying to communicate across the vast distances of space. Working together through the night, Lisa and Kevin began the painstaking process of extracting meaning from the alien transmission. The signal was weak and fragmented, coming in bursts separated by long periods of silence. Each burst contained complex mathematical sequences followed by what appeared to be pictographic representations of star systems and planetary configurations. As dawn broke over Earth, far below their orbital station, the pattern finally began to make sense. The transmission was a distress call, broadcast on multiple frequencies in the hope that someone, somewhere, would receive it and understand its desperate message. The mathematics were universal constants, the kind that any spacefaring civilization would recognize, and they served as a foundation for the more complex information that followed. The aliens called themselves the Zephyrian Collective, representing 6 different species from star systems in what humans knew as the Andromeda sector. Their worlds were under attack by something they called the Void Hunters, mechanical beings that consumed entire planets for raw materials. The transmission painted a picture of systematic destruction, with entire star systems going dark as the Void Hunters advanced through their territory. What made the message particularly urgent was its specific request for help from a species the Zephyrians had only heard rumors about. They spoke of a Deathworld species that refused to surrender even when facing impossible odds. Beings who fought with a ferocity that other civilized races found incomprehensible. They were calling for help from humanity, though they had never made direct contact before. Commander Jake Sullivan received the decoded message in his office at Earth Defense Force headquarters, reading through the translation with growing amazement. Humanity had always wondered if they were alone in the universe, and now they had proof that not only were there other intelligent species, but some of them were in desperate need of help. The implications were staggering. Earth had never faced a truly hostile alien species, and their military doctrine was based entirely on human conflicts and theoretical scenarios. The Zephyrian transmission described an enemy that had defeated multiple advanced civilizations, suggesting a level of technology and ruthlessness that humanity had never encountered. Captain Amy Foster, head of Earth's First Contact Protocol Division, argued strongly for caution when the Emergency Council convened. The transmission could be an elaborate trap designed to lure human forces away from Earth's defenses. Even if the message was genuine, humanity had no idea what they would be facing or whether their technology would be effective against such an advanced enemy. Admiral Chris Morgan listened to all the arguments, but found himself drawn to one particular aspect of the Zephyrian message. They had specifically sought out humans because of their reputation for refusing to give up when faced with overwhelming odds. Somehow, word of human tenacity had spread across the galaxy, even before first contact had been established. The debate continued for hours, with scientists arguing about the authenticity of the transmission, and military leaders discussing the risks of committing Earth's forces to an unknown conflict. Some suggested sending a small reconnaissance mission to verify the situation before making any major commitments, while others argued that any delay could result in the complete destruction of the Zephyrian Collective. Admiral Morgan made the decision that would define humanity's place in the galactic community. Earth would answer the call, not because it was safe or strategically sound, but because it was the right thing to do. If other species were crying out for help against an implacable enemy, humanity would not turn away from that plea. The order went out immediately to begin preparations for humanity's first interstellar military mission. Admiral Lisa Chen was chosen to command the expedition, with Colonel Mike Torres serving as her tactical officer. The massive carrier ship Terra's Wrath would serve as the flagship, accompanied by a fleet of humanity's most advanced vessels. The shipyards around Earth worked around the clock to prepare the fleet for departure. Engineers modified weapons systems based on the limited information available about Void Hunter technology, while scientists developed new communication protocols for interacting with the Zephyrian species. Every department contributed to the effort, knowing that they were participating in a historic moment. As the Terra's Wrath prepared for launch, Admiral Chen stood on the bridge looking out at Earth's blue marble suspended against the star-filled void. She thought about the thousands of crew members under her command and the families they were leaving behind. This mission would either establish humanity as a protector of innocent species or result in the complete destruction of Earth's first interstellar fleet. The launch itself was surprisingly quiet, with the massive ship slipping away from Earth's orbital facilities and accelerating toward the jump points that would carry them to the Andromeda sector. There were no grand ceremonies or public announcements, just the steady hum of engines and the knowledge that humanity was about to face its greatest test. Admiral Chen activated the ship's communication system and addressed her fleet. Her words were simple but carried the weight of an entire species' hopes and fears. They were going to help people they had never met fight an enemy they did not understand. Armed with nothing but human determination and the belief that some things were worth fighting for regardless of the odds. The Terra's Wrath and her escort vessels disappeared into the darkness between stars, carrying with them humanity's answer to an alien plea for help. The Terra's Wrath emerged from hyperspace at the coordinates provided in the Zephyrian transmission, and Admiral Lisa Chen immediately ordered all sensors to maximum range. What they found was both magnificent and terrifying. Kepler Station hung in the darkness like a crystal flower, its translucent spires and flowing architecture unlike anything human engineers had ever conceived. But the beauty was marred by the obvious signs of recent battle, with debris fields and damaged sections telling a story of desperate defense. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Johnson led the first contact team aboard a shuttlecraft, accompanied by Dr. Alex Thompson and Major Ryan Davis. As they approached the alien station, Sarah noticed how different it felt from human military installations. Where human bases were built for function and defense, Kepler Station seemed designed for harmony and peaceful cooperation. The very architecture spoke of a species that had never expected to face the kind of brutal warfare that was now consuming their worlds. Ambassador Veltar met them at the docking bay, and Sarah had to suppress her amazement at seeing her first alien being. The Zephyrian was tall and graceful, with skin that seemed to shimmer with an inner light and eyes that held depths of ancient wisdom. But what struck Sarah most was the weariness in those alien features, the weight of countless losses and failed battles against an implacable enemy. Veltar spoke through a translation device that converted their musical language into clear English, and their first words were ones of desperate gratitude. They had broadcast their plea into the void without any real hope of response, and the arrival of human ships represented the first good news their people had received in many cycles. The ambassador explained that they had heard rumors of the Deathworld species through other civilizations, stories of beings who fought with such ferocity that even hardened warriors spoke of them in whispered tones. Dr. Alex Thompson found himself fascinated by the Zephyrian physiology and culture as Veltar led them through the station. These beings had evolved on worlds where cooperation and harmony were essential for survival, creating a species that valued all life and sought to minimize casualties even during warfare. Their military doctrine was based on strategic withdrawals, preservation of population centers, and negotiated settlements that allowed both sides to claim some form of victory. Major Ryan Davis listened to the briefings about Void Hunter tactics with growing understanding of why every alien species had failed against this enemy. The Void Hunters were partially organic and partially mechanical, creating a hybrid consciousness that adapted to every strategy used against them. They learned from each encounter, uploading combat data to their collective intelligence and developing countermeasures that made previous tactics useless. Captain Nina Brooks arrived with the second wave of personnel, bringing with her the experience of Earth's resource wars and a perspective that the aliens found both fascinating and disturbing. When Veltar showed them footage of Void Hunter attacks, Nina's reaction was completely different from what they expected. Instead of horror or despair, she analyzed the enemy movements with clinical precision, identifying weaknesses that no previous species had recognized. The Zephyrians were puzzled by human military thinking, particularly the willingness to accept casualties in order to achieve strategic objectives. Their own philosophy emphasized the preservation of every life, leading to tactics that prioritize safety over effectiveness. They had never encountered a species that would deliberately sacrifice valuable resources to deny them to an enemy or use aggressive maneuvers that put their own forces at risk. Dr. Paula Williams spent hours studying captured Void Hunter technology, making disturbing discoveries about their adaptive capabilities. The enemy consciousness could process thousands of tactical variations simultaneously, creating response patterns that countered traditional military strategies within minutes of first contact. This explained why conventional approaches had become increasingly ineffective as the war progressed. The breakthrough came when Paula realized that the Void Hunter adaptation protocols were designed around the assumption that their opponents would behave rationally and prioritize self-preservation. The enemy collective consciousness had never encountered a species willing to take irrational risks or accept devastating losses in pursuit of victory. Human military doctrine, with its emphasis on aggressive action and acceptable casualties, represented a completely unknown variable in their calculations. Lieutenant Colonel Johnson worked with Veltar to understand the current tactical situation. Learning that Kepler Station was the last major outpost in this sector, the Void Hunters were expected to arrive within days, and the Zephyrian defenders were preparing for another strategic withdrawal that would abandon the facility to the enemy. Sarah found herself wondering what would happen if someone simply refused to retreat and chose to fight instead. The answer came sooner than expected when long-range sensors detected an incoming Void Hunter scout force. The alien defenders immediately began evacuation procedures, following protocols that had been developed over countless similar encounters. But Sergeant Tony Mitchell and his Marines had different ideas about how to handle the situation. As the Void Hunter ships approached Kepler Station, they encountered something unprecedented in their collective experience. Instead of the expected withdrawal, they faced aggressive defensive fire from positions that should have been abandoned. Human Marines, led by Corporal Emma Wilson, fought in conditions that would have been considered impossible by most species, including zero atmosphere, combat in close quarters fighting in damaged sections of the station. The Void Hunters found their tactical programs generating contradictory responses as they tried to process human behavior. The enemy collective consciousness had never encountered defenders who would deliberately damage their own positions to deny strategic advantage, or who would continue fighting even when facing overwhelming odds. Each adaptation the Void Hunters implemented was countered by increasingly aggressive human tactics that defied all logical analysis. The battle for Kepler Station lasted 18 hours, ending with the complete destruction of the Void Hunter scout force. But more importantly, it demonstrated that these mechanical beings could be confused and defeated when faced with opponents who refused to follow predictable patterns. The human victory sent shockwaves through both the Zephyrian defenders and the enemy collective consciousness. Ambassador Veltar stood with Admiral Chen on the Terra's Wrath Bridge, watching as human engineers worked alongside Zephyrian technicians to repair the station. For the first time in many cycles, there was hope in the aliens' luminous eyes. The Deathworld species had not only answered their call for help, but had proven that the Void Hunters could be beaten. The war was far from over, but humanity had changed the rules of engagement in ways that neither side had anticipated. Word of the human victory at Kepler Station spread through the remaining free sectors like wildfire, carried by refugees and survivors who had witnessed something impossible. The Deathworld species had not only fought the Void Hunters but had actually defeated them in direct combat. For civilizations that had known only retreat and loss for countless cycles, the news brought the first glimmer of hope in what had seemed like an endless war. Colonel Matt Lewis found himself tasked with an unprecedented challenge: training a joint force of humans and aliens in combat tactics that most species considered insane. The Zephyrians were joined by representatives from the Helix Consortium, the Stellar Collective, and other surviving civilizations, all eager to learn how the humans had achieved the impossible. But their first training sessions revealed just how different human thinking truly was. The alien warriors were skilled and brave, but their combat philosophy was built around minimizing casualties and preserving valuable resources. When Matt demonstrated human assault tactics, which involved accepting heavy losses to achieve critical objectives, the aliens were horrified by what they perceived as wasteful brutality. They could not understand why humans would deliberately sacrifice expensive equipment or risk valuable personnel when safer alternatives existed. Commander Julie Sanders was given the task that would prove human tactics on a larger scale. Intelligence reports indicated a major Void Hunter processing facility on Xerion Prime, a planet that had been considered impregnable by conventional forces. The facility was converting the world's resources into materials for the enemy war machine, and its destruction would significantly impact Void Hunter capabilities in this sector. Julie's plan was the kind of operation that alien military commanders would never approve. She proposed atmospheric entry using modified escape pods, landing her assault force directly on the planet's surface without the benefit of orbital bombardment or conventional support. The alien advisors declared the mission suicidal, pointing out that the survival rate for such an approach would be less than 40% even under ideal conditions. But Julie understood something that the aliens did not. The Void Hunters had adapted their defenses based on thousands of encounters with rational opponents who valued their own lives. They expected orbital assaults preceded by long-range bombardment, or careful infiltration missions that prioritized stealth over speed. They were not prepared for an enemy that would drop from the sky in barely controlled pods and immediately begin fighting. Regardless of casualties, Dr. Carl Baker worked frantically in his laboratory aboard the Terra's Wrath, analyzing every piece of Void Hunter technology that human forces had captured. His research confirmed what Paula Williams had discovered earlier. The enemy collective consciousness operated on predictive algorithms that assumed rational behavior from their opponents. When faced with actions that violated basic survival instincts, their response systems began generating conflicting instructions. The breakthrough came when Carl realized that the Void Hunters' greatest strength was also their greatest weakness. Their ability to adapt to new tactics was based on logical analysis of cause and effect relationships. But human military doctrine often involved deliberately irrational actions designed to achieve psychological or strategic advantages. The enemy consciousness simply could not process the concept of willing self-sacrifice for abstract principles. Major Rachel Stone took Carl's research and developed new combat doctrines specifically designed to exploit Void Hunter weaknesses. Her strategies involved feint retreats that turned into ambushes, deliberate destruction of valuable equipment to deny it to the enemy, and combat maneuvers that prioritized mission success over survival statistics. To alien observers, these tactics appeared to violate every principle of civilized warfare. The assault on Xerion Prime began exactly as Julie had planned. 40 modified escape pods screamed through the planet's atmosphere, while Void Hunter defensive systems tracked what appeared to be a catastrophic evacuation attempt. The enemy allocated minimal resources to intercept what their analysis indicated were fleeing survivors, focusing instead on protecting against the expected orbital assault that never came. Julie's Marines hit the ground running, literally emerging from crashed pods and immediately engaging Void Hunter forces that had been positioned to contain refugees rather than repel assault troops. Chief Engineer Ben Clark had modified their equipment specifically for this kind of operation, creating weapons that could function in hostile environments and armor that prioritized mobility over protection. The human assault force fought its way across the planet's surface using tactics that the Void Hunters found incomprehensible. When Sergeant Maria Gonzalez's unit was surrounded, they chose to fight their way out rather than surrender or attempt negotiation. When Lieutenant Sam Carter's vehicle was destroyed, he used the wreckage as an improvised weapon against enemy positions. Every human action violated the enemy's predictive models. The Void Hunter facility had been designed to withstand conventional siege tactics, with multiple defensive layers and redundant systems that could maintain operations even under sustained attack. But it had never been tested against opponents who would deliberately sacrifice their own positions to create breaches in enemy defenses, or who would use captured enemy weapons without regard for safety protocols. Julie led her remaining forces in a final assault on the facility's central processing core. Fighting through corridors that the enemy had considered impregnable, the Void Hunters attempted to adapt their defensive patterns to counter human aggression, but each adjustment was met with even more irrational tactics that pushed the limits of what their collective consciousness could process. The destruction of Zarian Prime's processing facility sent shockwaves through the Void Hunter network that extended far beyond the local sector. For the first time in their existence, they had encountered an enemy that became more dangerous as the situation became more desperate. Their collective consciousness began generating error reports as it struggled to develop countermeasures against opponents who seemed to thrive on impossible odds. Back aboard the Terra's Wrath, Admiral Chen received reports from across the sector indicating that Void Hunter forces were becoming increasingly erratic in their responses to alien resistance movements. The enemy's predictive algorithms were being overwhelmed by the introduction of human tactical thinking, creating opportunities that other species were beginning to exploit. Ambassador Veltar worked closely with human military planners to develop new joint operations that combined alien technological capabilities with human strategic thinking. The Zephyrians' advanced sensor systems and energy weapons were incredibly effective when used with human tactics that prioritized aggressive action over cautious preservation. Other alien species were beginning to request human advisors to help them develop more effective resistance strategies. The war was far from over, but the balance of power was shifting in ways that no one had anticipated. Humanity had not only answered the alien plea for help, but had fundamentally changed how the galaxy approached the concept of warfare against seemingly impossible odds. Operation Thunderstrike began in the early hours of the morning cycle when Captain Jerry Hughes led his squadron of human destroyers in what appeared to be a direct assault on the Rigel system's primary Void Hunter fortress. The massive enemy installation hung in the darkness like a mechanical spider, its metallic arms reaching out to grasp the resources of 3 conquered worlds. Every sensor array and defensive system focused on the approaching human fleet as the Void Hunters prepared to repel. What their analysis indicated was a desperate frontal attack. Jerry's ships moved in, formation patterns that the enemy collective consciousness recognized from previous human encounters. The destroyers fired their weapons in coordinated volleys while maintaining aggressive forward momentum, exactly as human forces had done at Kepler Station and Zerion Prime. The Void Hunters allocated their defensive resources accordingly, concentrating their most powerful weapons on what appeared to be the main threat approaching through conventional space lanes. Unknown to the mechanical defenders, the real assault force was approaching through the Rigel system's dense asteroid field, using a combination of stealth technology and tactics that no rational species would attempt. Commander Lisa Rodriguez had volunteered to lead this mission despite knowing that the survival odds were less than 20% even if everything went perfectly according to plan. Major Scott Peterson guided his assault ships through the treacherous asteroid field, using the massive rocks as cover while navigating by instruments alone. The asteroids created sensor shadows that could hide small craft from enemy detection, but they also presented navigation hazards that had destroyed countless ships over the centuries. Most species avoided the field entirely, considering it too dangerous for military operations. The human ships moved through the asteroids like predators stalking prey, using gravitational slings and momentum transfers that pushed their vessels to the absolute limits of structural integrity. Scott watched his navigation displays with the calm focus of someone who had accepted that death was a likely outcome, but was determined to complete the mission, regardless of personal cost. When Lieutenant Sam Carter's destroyer struck an asteroid and began venting atmosphere, he made a decision that shocked even his human comrades. Instead of attempting repairs or calling for rescue, Sam directed his damaged ship toward the largest concentration of enemy vessels and began a terminal attack run. His sacrifice created the distraction that Lisa's main force needed to reach their primary target. The battle became a testament to human adaptability when every contingency plan failed within the first hour of combat. Sergeant Maria Gonzalez found her unit cut off from the main assault force and surrounded by Void Hunter reinforcements. But instead of requesting evacuation, she led her Marines in an attack on a secondary objective that her tactical analysis indicated might be vulnerable to small unit. Assault Dr. Helen Garcia worked from the mobile command center that had been established on one of the larger asteroids, monitoring enemy communications and analyzing Void Hunter response patterns. She discovered that the mechanical consciousness was generating increasingly contradictory instructions as it struggled to process human tactics that violated every principle of rational military doctrine. The turning point came when Colonel Danny Brown received orders to lead a desperate assault on the Void Hunter Central Processing Core. The facility was located deep within the fortress structure, protected by multiple defensive layers and automated systems that had never been breached by any previous attack. Intelligence reports indicated that destroying this core would cripple enemy operations throughout the entire sector. Danny's team fought their way through corridors, designed to channel attackers into killing zones, but they used human tactics that turned the enemy's advantages against them. When defensive positions blocked their advance, they created new routes by blasting through walls and floors. When automated systems tried to trap them in sealed compartments, they used explosive charges to create escape routes that the Void Hunters had never anticipated. Corporal Andy Taylor became the hero of the assault when his unit encountered a massive Void Hunter defensive position that blocked access to the processing core. The enemy had concentrated their most advanced combat units in this location, creating what appeared to be an impregnable barrier. But Andy understood something that the mechanical consciousness did not. Sometimes the only way forward was through sacrifice. Andy volunteered for a suicide mission that would draw enemy fire away from the demolition team, giving them the opportunity to plant their charges in the processing core. He fought alone against impossible odds for nearly 30 minutes, using every weapon and explosive device available, while his comrades completed their mission. His sacrifice saved not only his immediate team but potentially millions of lives throughout the sector. The destruction of the Rigel Fortress processing core sent massive shockwaves through the Void Hunter collective consciousness that extended across multiple star systems. For the first time in their existence, the mechanical beings experienced something approaching panic as their predictive algorithms failed to generate effective responses to human tactical doctrine. Major Pete Collins led the ground assault on the fortress exterior while the main battle raged inside, fighting in conditions that would have killed most alien species within minutes. The surface of the fortress was exposed to hard vacuum and intense radiation, but human forces had been equipped with armor, systems that prioritized functionality over comfort or safety. Margins. The final phase of Operation Thunderstrike involved coordinated attacks on 17 different Void Hunter positions throughout the Rigel system. Each assault was led by human forces using tactics specifically designed to overwhelm enemy adaptive systems, creating multiple crisis points that the collective consciousness could not process simultaneously. When the smoke finally cleared, the Rigel system belonged to the Allied forces for the first time since the Void Hunter invasion began. The mechanical fortress that had seemed impregnable was now a drifting wreck, its processing systems destroyed and its defensive capabilities neutralized. But more importantly, the victory demonstrated that human tactical thinking could be scaled up to defeat even the most heavily defended enemy positions. Admiral Chen received reports from across the galaxy indicating that Void Hunter forces were experiencing systematic failures in their command and control systems. The introduction of human military doctrine had created cascading problems in the enemy collective consciousness that were spreading far beyond the immediate battle zones. The victory at Rigel marked the beginning of the end for Void Hunter dominance in this region of space, but it also established humanity as the military leaders of the growing alliance, with other species requesting human commanders for their most critical operations against the mechanical invaders. 6 months after the victory at Rigel, the galaxy had become a completely different place. Captain Frank Miller commanded a mixed fleet of human and alien vessels as they approached the Omega Centauri system, the heart of Void Hunter territory, and the location of their primary consciousness matrix. The ships moved in formation patterns that would have been impossible before human tactical doctrine spread throughout the allied species. The Zephyrians had learned to fight with aggressive determination that their ancestors would not have recognized. The Helix Consortium now used ramming attacks and suicide runs as standard tactical options. Even the peaceful Stellar Collective had developed weapon systems designed for maximum destruction rather than minimal casualties. Humanity had not only taught the galaxy how to fight back, but had fundamentally changed how civilized species approached the concept of warfare. General Patricia. Adam stood on the bridge of the command ship Terra Victorious, watching as the largest interstellar military operation in galactic history prepared for its final assault. More than 2,000 vessels from dozens of different species had gathered for this moment, united by human leadership and driven by the determination that Earth's children had brought to the stars. The Void Hunter homeworld hung before them like a mechanical nightmare, its surface covered with processing facilities and manufacturing centers that had consumed the resources of 100 conquered civilizations. The planet itself had been transformed into a single massive machine, dedicated to the production of more Void Hunters and the expansion of their mechanical empire across the galaxy. Admiral Nancy King led the first wave of attackers, her battle group consisting entirely of human vessels equipped with the most advanced weapons that Earth's engineers could devise. She knew that her ships would face the concentrated firepower of the enemy's most sophisticated defenses, but she also knew that someone had to break through the outer barriers to allow the main assault force to reach its objectives. Nancy's flagship exploded in a brilliant flash of light as it rammed directly into the primary Void Hunter defense station, taking the massive enemy installation with it in a blast that could be seen from across the star system. Her sacrifice created the breach that Major Pete Collins needed to lead his ground assault forces through the enemy defensive perimeter and onto the planet's mechanized surface. Pete's Marines landed on a world where the very ground beneath their feet was composed of interlocking machinery and processing systems. The atmosphere was toxic to most forms of life, and the surface temperature fluctuated between extremes that would have killed any other species within minutes. But human forces had been prepared for these conditions, equipped with armor and life support systems that allowed them to fight in environments that the Void Hunters considered perfectly safe from organic intrusion. The battle for the Void Hunter homeworld lasted for 72 hours and became the most brutal conflict in recorded galactic history. Lieutenant Kelly Barnes piloted her fighter through defensive fire that destroyed 90% of her squadron, carrying nuclear charges toward the planetary consciousness matrix in a one-way mission that she knew would end her life but might save the galaxy. Kelly's sacrifice allowed the demolition teams to reach their target, but the consciousness matrix was protected by defensive systems that adapted to every attack within seconds of first contact. The Void Hunters had learned from their previous encounters with human forces and had developed countermeasures specifically designed to defeat the aggressive tactics that had proven so effective in earlier battles. Colonel Danny Brown found himself leading the final assault on the consciousness matrix itself, fighting through corridors filled with mechanical defenders that seemed to anticipate every human tactical innovation. The enemy had finally learned to process human irrationality and had developed response patterns that countered even the most desperate suicide attacks. The breakthrough came when Dr. Helen Garcia made a critical discovery about the nature of the Void Hunter collective consciousness. The mechanical beings had adapted to human tactical thinking by incorporating elements of irrationality into their own decision-making processes. But this adaptation had created fundamental conflicts within their core programming. Helen realized that the Void Hunters were no longer purely mechanical beings but had become something between machine and organic consciousness, incorporating human behavioral patterns that violated their original logical frameworks. This hybrid consciousness was inherently unstable and could be overloaded by presenting it with paradoxes that it could not resolve. The final assault became a battle not just for military objectives but for the very nature of consciousness itself. Human forces deliberately created tactical situations that forced the Void Hunter collective to make choices between logical efficiency and the irrational aggression they had learned from their human enemies. Captain Roger Davis led the team that finally reached the core of the consciousness matrix, fighting through defenses that seemed to shift between mechanical precision and organic desperation. The Void Hunters had become something they had never intended to be, and that transformation had made them vulnerable in ways they could not understand. The destruction of the consciousness matrix did not result in the immediate shutdown of all Void Hunter forces throughout the galaxy, but it created a cascade failure that spread through their collective intelligence network. Without central coordination, the mechanical beings began making increasingly contradictory decisions that turned their own forces against each other. Ambassador Veltar stood with Admiral Chen on the observation deck of the Terra Victorious, watching as the Void Hunter homeworld began to tear itself apart. The mechanical infrastructure that had seemed so indestructible was collapsing as automated systems received conflicting instructions from a consciousness that could no longer distinguish between logical objectives and the irrational determination it had absorbed from humanity. The war was finally over, but the galaxy would never return to its previous state of peaceful coexistence. Humanity had not only saved the civilized species from extinction, but had taught them that sometimes survival required the willingness to sacrifice everything for principles that transcended individual existence. Captain Roger Davis accepted the formal establishment of the Terran Defense Corps as the galaxy's primary military force, knowing that Earth's children would now bear the responsibility for protecting the peace they had fought so hard to achieve. Human colonies were already being established throughout the former Void Hunter territory, carrying with them the values and determination that had made victory possible. The final scene showed children from dozens of different species playing together on New Terra, the first joint colony established in the liberated systems. They spoke a mixture of languages and carried the genetic heritage of worlds scattered across the galaxy, but they all shared the legacy of those who had answered an alien plea with characteristic human valor.